live now. Are we waiting on another one of your team members, or is everybody here?
This is it. This is the team right
This
here.
is
well,
the
this
team.
is part of the team, but
Right.
I got one person doing live.
Videotape. We're live. Is this Facebook Live?
It is, and you're on.
Hey, Facebook Live. It's me, Dave Schrader from the Holzer Files and Ghosts of Devil's Perch. You should be here having a good time and listening to amazing speakers that are going to talk to you about searching for spirits. So do me a favor, folks. Welcome into the room. Enjoy yourself. Grab a seat. Turn your volume down on your phones or turn it off entirely so that you don't interrupt. And if you have to take a call, take it out in the hall. Don't do it in here, okay? Let's give your attention over to our speakers for the next hour. And I will be back to lead you at 2 o'clock till 3 o'clock with even more sermons of the supernatural. Ladies and gentlemen, search for spirits.
Welcome. My name is Russ.
And I'm Mark.
And we are the lead investigator, founders of Search for Spirits. And we've been around for about 11 years and involved in a lot of different things, from the standard paranormal to cryptid type things to just things that are unexplainable. A lot of those cases that people just can't figure out what's going in their home. We're like, okay, let's go in and figure it out. And you guys, most of you are involved in similar stuff, so you know what we're talking about. But we have a topic today that is slightly off the shelf from what we normally talk about. We are going to talk about invisible species of things that are in the woods. We're going to talk specifically about things that we've run into that are prominent in recent years. I've spent a lot of time in the woods over the years, and it just seems like in the recent years we're getting more reports of it, as well as we're experiencing it more ourselves. And so it's a very interesting phenomenon that we felt would be interesting to address in an audience that might have some feedback as well. Because
find out if you guys have experienced anything similar.
And so I'll just start out with one of the stories, and then Mark and I will kind of go into another story, and because that's kind of what we're doing. To us, this process is one of telling testimonies that is somewhat storytelling, but these are real. So they're stories, but they're real stories, and we tell them as a testimony to what we've experienced, and hopefully then it'll create some conversation that will lead into further knowledge for all of us to pick up. So,
sorry, I'm getting feedback.
Yeah. I mean, I could hold on to the speaker and talk, but I don't know. Did other people hold on to the... I don't think... In the back, can you hear me? You're good? All right. You know, Dave's been announcing... We were just at an expo 2 weeks ago, and I was the announcer. I could talk loud when I need to, and so I could pipe it up a little bit. Here we were. It's about 5-6 years ago, maybe 7 years ago. I'm up north. I'm walking down this trail, and I was just, you know, like people hiking, and I was working around. I was looking at stuff in the woods, and this is a property that I'm quite familiar with, and I hear something kind of off to my side, and I glance over, and there's like 2 or 3 evergreen trees right in a row there, and I see from the top of one of the evergreen trees something slides down about 8 foot of the tree, and it pushes the branches over as it comes down, and then stops there all of a sudden. And I'm staring at it, and I'm like, I don't see it. If it was a bear or something up in that tree that you would see, you'd be like, okay, I see what made the branches turn. I see what made the sound of this thing dropping down the top of this tree, down 8 feet, and stops. I'm like, but there's nothing to see. And so then I'm like, you know, strange things happen in the world. And I just kind of don't think about it at all and leave it go. I'm like, okay, whatever. But then within 2 years, I'm back in this same area, and I noticed that that exact tree that 8 feet died. It's dead. A year later, it's actually broke off. So now the tree's cut off right at the spot where whatever slid down that tree is, the top of that tree is gone. So I'm out in this area, and I'm thinking maybe this is Bigfoot. You know, I just can't see him. Maybe this is some other creature. And I'm getting very intrigued by the fact that something is out here that I can't explain. And that's what we do. You know, we get very interested in trying to explain something that we don't know. And so I'm back in this area, and I'm just thinking. And I'll be honest, I had just recently watched a show where they were thinking about UFOs, and they were like in a group, and they're like, UFOs, aliens. And somehow they're like meditating on aliens, and lo and behold, they saw unidentified flying objects in the sky. And they did this as an experiment. So I'm like, well, maybe if I do something like that. So I'm like, Bigfoot, where are you? You know, I'm thinking about it. I know you're there. Matter of fact, a sighting had been seen as the crow flies probably maybe half, 3/4 mile down the road. So I knew there was the potential that Bigfoot could be in that area because he had been seen in that area. And so I'm thinking, okay, Bigfoot, if you're out there, some other creature, let me know you're here. Well, nothing happens. It wasn't quite good enough because I'm like, I gotta wait till it gets darker. I need more darkness. So I grab a lawn chair, I go back to that spot right at dusk. And I set that lawn chair down in the weeds, kind of hiding. I sit down. I'm just gonna sit here nice and quiet for an hour or two. And while I was sitting there, and it was a fairly quiet night, I heard light footsteps in the grass coming up behind me. Those are awfully light footsteps for Bigfoot. What is that? Something else I can't explain, but I can't say it was a Bigfoot sitting in the top of that tree, so maybe it's not. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's a youthful Bigfoot. I mean, you can't explain it if you can't see it. But I hear something, I'm looking back, and there's nothing there. Nothing that makes those footsteps. As a matter of fact, it started happening so much that even my son, when he was sitting on the deer stand in this area, and we don't talk about this stuff, he isn't involved in this like I am, and he's like, Dad, do you notice there's more footsteps, and there's like not a squirrel there, or not a deer or anything? Do you notice that's happening more? I said, actually I do, and I can't explain why it is happening more, but it is. But I'll speed this up just a little bit. So anyway, I go back there, and I'm sitting there, I hear these footsteps, I kind of blow them off, they're too small, that's little stuff. I am waiting for something bigger, and all of a sudden, you hear something that is incredibly bigger coming through the woods. And it's angling through in front of me, just beyond view, as is always the case. But it's angling, but I can tell it's walking right up to that tree with the broken off tip on it. And it gets right up to it, and the minute it gets up there, big heavy footsteps, a giant black, it was probably like a raven or something, takes off. I mean, this is, essence of it is already dark at this time. And I hear this, and the big bird takes off and squawks a bit, and the noises are behind me, and I packed up my chair and I walked back to the road. Sometimes when you're by yourself, it takes a little bit extra to be a little braver than what you are. But I have brought Mark now to this area a few times, and one time we had this flash of light. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, the flashlight was almost like if you're below a bluff and a car does a turnaround, the light kind of flashes through the trees. Well, there's really nothing but woods back there, so it's pretty impossible. It would have to be big, like a spotlight. So we saw that, and we're like, well, that's really strange.
Yeah.
And then as we're walking down the trail, something about, probably to the wall, just out of sight, starts walking with us. And,
Parallel.
yeah, and you hear it crunch, crunch. And as we walked down the trail, it followed us all the way down to that Y.
You know, it is dark night, you know, and you stop, you know,
And it's walking.
it's still going. Wait 1 minute. It's almost like a TV
You
show,
test it.
like a cartoon or something.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, why is this thing pacing us?
And it paced us all the way back.
All the way to the end of that trail.
Yeah.
Because we actually turned around then.
But always out of sight.
But then we got to the end of the trail and
Oh, there was creaking trees.
yeah, there was
Just one tree, no wind. The tree's like going like this.
Yeah.
So who knows? Can't see it, so you don't know what it is.
yeah. But the creaking tree leads us to another story about another creaking
The
tree.
knocking tree.
The knocking tree.
Yeah.
Same situation, like no wind, nothing's going on. One tree. It was kind of groaning, or I can't even really explain it. Knocking, groaning.
It's strange.
But none of the other trees in the woods, you know, we're standing there, it's just quiet. One tree just making a racket on its own. So then what?
So I came up to it with my knife. I took my knife out and I knocked on the first tree. Because I want to see which tree it is. It's not that one. And as I'm knocking on the second tree, something huge leaves from behind the tree and starts running away. And it sounded heavy, like 500 pounds, but you couldn't see it.
Yeah.
But it's running off. And we're like,
But-
holy crap.
Yeah, I mean, and this thing, like I say, you can tell the difference between like a
It was stomping.
deer
Yeah.
and a and that thing ran, it was, I would say about 35 to 40 feet in front of me, running at a 45 degree right past the front of me, and I can hear it, and all my senses are on it, and I know where it's going, but there is nothing to see. It's dusk again, of course
Yeah.
it's always dusk, but there's just nothing.
My hair just stood. It was a huge presence. But another funny thing though is we were doing Facebook Live, and this lady typed in all caps. She's like, "Get out! You know, we're
Get
like,
out of there!
Yeah, we're like, nah, we'll keep going. So we went down the trail a little farther until we hit water, but that thing was in the woods, like circling us, like just you could hear it walking.
Well, yeah, it circled us, and then it dropped off like it had its zone, and we kept walking, and then we were by ourselves, and we turned around and came back to the spot, and as soon as we got back in the spot, then it started stalking / circling us a second
And
time.
the tree started knocking again.
Yeah,
Yeah, weird. Yeah, I don't know.
and in the end, we didn't have much equipment. We were scouting at the time, you know, so we didn't have like the millimeter or anything, so we didn't really measure. And but we've been out this woods, this particular area since then. As a matter of fact, we went there this year with the team, specifically to kind of see.
The annual Bigfoot hunt. Yeah.
Yeah, we have an annual event where another team or two come with us out and just have an event. Set up different scenarios of how we're going to be out in the woods to try to see, you know, catch something, catch some evidence. And this area had experienced severe tornado damage, which was the trail we wanted to go to where we had the experience. The tornado had just whipped up that spot like nobody's business.
Couldn't walk 12 foot down.
Trees over everywhere. And I'm like, is that coincidence that the spot we want to get to where the energy is at, now you can't even get to it because that spot, most of the, but not the trail going to that spot. You know, nature and the elements of the realms working together to block off this path, maybe? It's hard to say.
And we experienced something that night too. We were just wrapping up. He was picking up a camera. Russ was just down the trail and something poked his head up from behind one of the trees. And I'm like, Russ, you're to your right. And he looks, well, and he doesn't see anything.
Yeah.
So we walk over and you can hear it stepping around in there, making noises.
Well, it gave us kind of a grunt, kind of
And,
a,
yeah, and then it yelled at us.
like that,
And,
very similar to that. You know,
Yeah,
kind of,
but we couldn't see it. It would have been, but we should have been able to see it.
yeah, but we couldn't see it. But I mean, there was a lot of debris there and stuff. And we actually, in the EVPs, we had audio and cameras and all that running. And in the EVPs, they actually mentioned Yeti twice, which is interesting since Yeti isn't necessarily known as the name. Often in Minnesota, it's called Bigfoot. You know, if you go down a spot, it's Sasquatch or Yeti. You know, and twice it was referred to as Yeti in EVPs, and once as Bigfoot.
Yeah, didn't they say that it can't hurt us or whatever?
Yeah, potentially. Like I say, wherever we go to look for Bigfoot, we always run into supernatural, paranormal, deceased soul spirits in the same exact vicinity. And that's I wouldn't even say it's a high probability, it's a fact.
It's every
that
time.
Every single time we go into these locations, we are making contact with deceased souls.
Right.
Every time.
Every time.
And so that's a big aspect of it. And the fact that you can hear the EVPs and you hear, like I say, they mentioned Yeti, they mentioned Bigfoot. Matter of fact, they said something to the effect, I mean, and it's hard to hear some, obviously, is everybody familiar with EVPs? Just what that terminology means? You know, just voice phenomena. And we work with a lot of different voice phenomena. It might be digital phenomena, you know, electronic phenomena, all types of voices like that. We use and work with different tones, different things to try to pick out different words. And we found a few things that work pretty good. And that night, I could hear the fact that there was a spirit for sure, at least one, if not two, that had followed me all the way out. And what we did, we set up a base camp, let's just call it that, a base camp control center where we had our cameras base set up, you know, and then we ran cameras out. But not only did we run a perimeter of cameras, we ran a perimeter of people. So in every direction, like we had a team of 2 people, like a quarter mile out this way, a team of 2 out here, a team of 2 out there, and the base camp was doing like rabbit distress calls and coyote calls and wood knocks and stuff like that. We've known Bigfoot or species that are in the woods, sometimes unidentifiable, that will respond even to deer grunts. We've had that comment come in and had conversations with people that are doing deer grunts, and all of a sudden they get a screech nearby them and they go, hey, what's that, you know?
Yeah.
And
coyote calls, they'll...
Yeah.
Oh, we did have coyotes come in.
Well, yeah, late at night, we had a whole, essentially like a pack of them come
We
in.
did, yeah.
I followed the last team in.
Yeah, they followed the last team in from their spot. But again, that night I was on site, large stick breaks, and right after that stick breaks, I'm like, I was doing a Facebook Live that night as I walked up to my spot where I was going to sit, and I said, I got to go, I'm having some activity here, I'm going to sit here, and I set it down, big stick breaks, and then a spirit says something to the effect, I can tell you exactly what it says, it's on my phone, but I can't see right now. It says something to the effect that there's a Bigfoot there, and one of the other spirits says, it can't hurt us. Well, that's a good thing, I guess. If you're a spirit, Bigfoot, you know, how do they relate? You know, the Bigfoot in our minds is coming in and out of this different realm. So, you know, if you see them, it's kind of a gift that you do see them, in my mind, that they kind of offer you that opportunity to see them, because I don't think they really need to let anybody see them. But it does happen, and in many cases they can be out in the woods or in your space, and they are completely unseeable. So we're absolutely confident in that part of it. Is it an absolute truth? No, but I certainly, based on our experiences, some of the invisible things that are acting out there, especially that big heavy one that went running by us, what's that big running around there? It had to have been like a Bigfoot type species of sort. And species, is it even proper to call them a species? Because that's like Earth terminology. So species might be a weird term to use, but it's some type of being.
You could tell it was bipedal.
What's that?
You could tell it was bipedal.
I could tell it was humanoid.
You mean like the big one?
Yeah.
That's what it sounded like, a really heavy
It's-
man running through the
On
woods.
2 feet.
Yeah,
Yes.
Bam, bam,
It
bam.
was definitely like, and I say, in the time we spent in the woods, I mean, we've heard a lot of deer run through the woods and other types of things. But just the weight of this thing, you could tell was so much more.
It didn't break branches either.
Not in the spot, but it was kind of clear.
Yeah, but still it was running through the woods in the dark.
Yeah. Yeah, I had one time in the dark, something walked by me, you know, and that part, sometimes they're invisible to you because it's pitch black out. But anyway, but in some cases you're close enough to know. And I had one walk by me, and that was farther away though, but close enough. And I was sitting, and he starts walking, out of the blue, all of a sudden I hear something walking. And, but I could hear close enough that I could hear the sticks breaking underneath his feet, but I could also hear the breaking. He was using his hands because he was in the thicket and the deepest of stuff. So you could hear his feet breaking the sticks, but I was close enough that I could hear him breaking sticks with his hands as he was making his way through the woods, you know. And I mean, in that case, I was probably just a slight bit too far away to see it. But again, we're just kind of talking about the invisible
Creatures.
type creatures. And those are actually a couple of the larger experiences. We've had a lot of smaller ones.
Yeah.
And a lot of, you know, we're in the woods usually when we're looking for some type of, we're on a call about a cryptid. That's usually when, we don't normally do a lot of woods calls for paranormal. They're usually involving some type of cryptid or some type of unknown type thing. And we did one we were at where went out at night. We had set cameras up probably like 1 o'clock in the morning. And we're sitting there, and that was the same thing. And again, it was much smaller footsteps.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's this younger, like Bigfoot type creatures, or is it a totally different creature of a different element that's totally different? You hear it just coming up, right? We're sitting there, and you know, we had enough lights and IRs and stuff running, nothing's on cameras, nothing's in front of us.
Yeah, so that's where it goes from your forest friend, like a deer or a raccoon or a skunk. And you know, coming up where you should be able to see it, but you don't.
Yeah, it's just nothing there. And when we were at that site that night, we were getting a whole bunch of like pebbles that were probably about this size, guesstimated. We didn't actually see them,
No.
but we kept hearing pebbles shooting through the leaves above us, back and forth.
Yeah.
While we were sitting in there.
Yeah.
We're just like, you know, is that some type of, is it orbs like shooting around through the leaves,
we couldn't see
or is
them,
it
yeah.
small stones that are getting thrown through the leaves? But we heard it numerous times,
We did.
too many times to be like, you know, like it even being a coincidence. It was
Right.
purposeful activities going on around us.
The other team we do the hunt with, they experienced that same thing.
Yeah.
Things throwing like little rocks. at
Right.
them.
But a lot of times when you hear some of the other Bigfoot stories, I mean, they might throw bigger rocks or big stones or different things like that. And in this case, in some cases, we were running into stuff that's very small pebbles. And it starts to make you wonder, is there a distinction between the larger things you're running into and the smaller ones? And when they're invisible, that's kind of hard. But I know the sounding was much the same. I was with the guy in the woods, and we were actually hunting that time. And he was sitting on a stand, and something came up out of the swamp on his left. And he had that was the guy who had just done the grunt with this deer call. And right away it set off a screech in the swamp and wood knocks. And then whatever it was, suddenly it was over on this side in a different swamp doing the same thing, just banging on. And I was about 75 yards away, and I could hear it plain as day. I was like, what is this guy doing? We're quiet now, we're deer hunting here. It's horsing around out in the woods. And but when we met at dusk, he's just like white in his face. And this is a guy that's, I would say, a skeptic per se. He's not really even in a discussion that I have about this type of stuff. We never even talk about it. This, by kind of coincidence, we ended up in the spot where I knew Bigfoot had been sighted before. I just have a tendency to be drawn to those areas. But anyway, he didn't see anything. There's nothing to be seen. And so the next morning we get up, I said, we gotta go out there because there's snow on the ground, we gotta check this out. And first we hardly found any tracks. We found one lone set of tracks come through and would have went exactly according to the scenario right where we, and the tracks were probably, you know, no bigger than about this, but by golly, they had a kick of about 4+ feet, 4 to 5 feet between them. And the interesting thing is, like, there'd be a track, 4 feet, double, like you could tell it was a double track, and then 4 or 5 feet in a single track. And trailed deer for years. I know what the deer look like. I know what other animal tracks and stuff look like. And trying to keep in mind that whatever this strange track was potentially the thing that is knocking on trees. I don't know creatures out there in the normal wild that I'm familiar with that knock on trees to get your attention.
Right.
There's a lot of things that make a lot of calls and screeches and growls and yells and different things like that, but they don't knock on trees. And
Right.
so this was some type of creature with a much smaller size foot that was, we didn't see it. It moved around him again at dusk. Dusk is a beautiful time in the woods apparently. But the energy,
Yeah.
like we'll go out sometimes and it's like just nothing. We're just like, oh, this is just strolling nighttime versus this is investigating.
Yeah.
You know, and you feel the energy before you get out of your car on the side of the road and you just pause for a second and you breathe in the air and the woods and the atmosphere and you just know sometimes that energy carries just a strange bit of oddness.
Yeah.
Just a titch of fear that kind of sits on your shoulder as you're standing there.
A little
And you're like,
unwelcoming, yeah.
what is this here?
Right.
And we find that a lot of times it's when the moon is much smaller, the energy seems to be a little higher. When the moon is larger, it seems to be a little bit. And that's not a scientific study I've done, but I've just noticed that when it's a full moon, I walked around the middle of the woods at 2 a.m. and not felt anything. It just not even a titch of strangeness to the woods.
Right.
But there's been nights when we got to that one trail opening and we're like about 10 feet from that trail and whoa, she's heavy in here.
Yeah.
But
so you have to walk through a door to get into it.
yeah,
That's weird.
I got one other one. You got one you want to tell?
Think about yours first.
Okay. And this one was actually one of the rare winter ones that I had. And this is in that same area. I don't tend to call it a research area, but like it's kind of like a popular term now. In the research area where we go, that's getting to be a common term out there. People have their own kind of research areas. And I would say this is our research area because we spend the most time in this particular zone of national forest.
Yeah.
And so I went out there one time, and it was in the middle of a heavy snow, and it was a heavy snow, and I've always found that the energy from a very heavy snow seems to carry, there's just an energy that seems inviting, and to me anyway. I'm not home.
Guess who? It is.
Give away client names. Anyway,
They'll all know who he is, so.
So it's a heavy snow. It's probably 4 or 5 inches on the ground already. And I'm like, I'm gonna see. And I was by myself, but I'm like, I'm gonna see what that trail feels like. So I go over there and I get up to the trail base and I'm like, I think I could do this. I am a paranormal investigator. Darkness shouldn't bother me, but sometimes that energy is so heavy that it's just like you really have to kind of convince yourself, especially if you're completely by yourself, that, all right, I'm going to walk through this tunnel here. And so here I am, and I'm like, I'm going to start walking. And I start walking along. And I noticed, like I say, I know I already have, this trail's mysterious, I know it, but it lives up to its name. So I'm walking along, and I noticed that there's a breeze on my right side. And it kind of comes up, and it's just like, I don't know, those breezes that kind of come up around in the woods, maybe they're little mini tornadoes, whatever they are, but this is during the storm. And I noticed that I'm walking along, and it kind of catches up with me and shakes all the leaves off the small trees next to me. And I stop, and I'm like, what's that? And, the snow kind of falls, but it's quiet. I turn and I start walking again. Okay. And I look over, and the snow's coming out of the trees. And as soon as I stop, nothing. The wind's gone, no snow falling. And this happens like 5 times. Okay. Snow falls. Just reminiscent of the fact that how we mentioned in the other story about how it just felt like something was following me. It didn't feel like it. Something was moving along, but it was in a wind, and it moved about, and it was from here to those doors. It was right on me. I could see it, and the white of the snow made everything just appear light. But I could see it moving through those branches, literally, and see the wind of it and the shaking of the branches. But when I stood, I could stand there for 10 minutes, stand there and stare at the branch. Okay, well, maybe that wind will come again. Nothing. But as soon as I started walking, I'd hear like a wind come through, and all the snow would fall off the branches on the trees. But it's just getting weird. And I get about halfway there, but it had snowed so much that the branches are starting to bend over. And I'm really maybe less than a quarter mile down this trail. And it's been snowing heavy. And suddenly I'm like, I got confused. I got this incredible confusion. And I didn't even know where the trail was anymore. I'm like, what the world is going on? I don't even know where I'm at. I'm wandering, I'm looking, and everything's white, and I could hardly see my tracks. And I had no idea what's the trail. I didn't know where the trail was. And I got this immense confusion. And it was really starting to patter at my heart a little bit. I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't even know where I am. But this looks like something. And I walked 50 yards. I don't recognize anything. By now, the branches have all kind of bent over from the heavy, wet snows and stuff. I'm not recognizing any of the normal stuff that we see on a summertime walk or a fall walk or a spring walk. Everything just looks different because it's all white and the branches are all bent over. And I walked back this way, another 50 yards back in my story. I'm regroup, where are you? And it took a bit. I had to kind of take a leap of faith, and I just kept walking that one direction. And finally I started recognizing. But I was like, oh my gosh, this is an area I walk probably 5, 6, 10 times a year. All of a sudden it's completely foreign to me, and it was like fogging my brain up. Was it the weird thing that was following me along all of a sudden, messing with me? I can't even explain it, but the fact that they can and will get up in your mind as well. And we've had that at one Bigfoot site I was at, where I was sitting there and we were all quiet and we had some activity that night. And as I was sitting there, I had visions of like a house burning, of the road exploding. And they were showing me visions of things that could occur to block off the path to this area. Like they were like, you need to give us more protection. You need to keep people from coming to this area. And I'm just sitting there receiving these visions, and I'm like, I'm not burning anybody's house down. I'll go to jail. What good does that do anybody? I'm sitting in jail. I'm not gonna blow up the road over here. And I just, you know, an unusual response to an unusual request that came through a vision. I'm like, I'm not destroying property. I don't know what you need to do to remain anonymous or to have more breathing space out here. I don't like the idea that they're making so many trails all over the darn place either. And they're encroaching upon all these spots where families of Bigfoot are in existence. Other creatures that we don't even know that exist are invisible to us, but they exist. But the constant amount of trails and stuff, like if you go up north now compared to even 10 years ago, I mean, I remember walking through forests and stuff where I could walk for 3 miles in, you know, watching the sun and my compass, and I'd be out in the middle of nowhere. There's not as many places like that that exist anymore. They just don't exist. They've, you know, and I'm all about logging and stuff like that, but all of a sudden there's trails running right through the middle of all these spots, and once that trail's there, and I like hiking and stuff too, and I like four-wheeling, but it's become overabundant with the fact that every kind of quiet space that's been out there, there's now trails and four-wheelers and side-by-sides, and I love doing it too, but I don't think we need as many to go through every single space on Earth. I think we could leave zones of space, but how do you know? How do I explain that to the game board? No trails over here.
Spirits say.
Bigfoot's over here. The spirits are saying nothing. Stop putting these
And I'm
trails
gonna
over
burn it
here.
all down, right?
You guys don't stop. We have enough trails. They're not, I mean, if I tell them Bigfoot needs some space, what do you think they're going to say to me?
Don't believe in it. We need to see his face.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We're locking
We're going to probably lock me up because I can only talk about that in this audience right here, right? Because, I mean, it's people that have experienced those types of things. But the phenomena of the non-visible creatures and the contact has been increasing quite a bit in the last just 2 years even.
Right.
And part of it might be to our encroachment on that space. And part of it might be to the changing universe. I mean, there's all kinds of sorts of types of things that might be going on. And that's why we're talking about the subject today. And that's kind of the wrap of our part of it. But the reason we're bringing this up today is because we want to hear what other people are experiencing when it comes to this type of phenomena. I mean, has anybody experienced that type of stuff?
I haven't, but my husband has, and my son and his friend, as adults.
Oh, anybody okay with being on Facebook Live? If you don't want to be, we won't shoot you. But if you're okay, I'd like to get the story. You tell it while we're talking.
I might not get all the details completely right, but they were our son and his friend, and all adults. They in their, I suppose, late 20s, and then my husband, and they were on the Boundary Waters canoeing.
Okay.
And they pulled over for the afternoon in one of the camping spots that they put along the shores up there. And the two, our son and his friend, were in their canoes. They were out fishing out in the water, and of course in the canoes. And my husband was at camp getting things ready for the night and getting wood and everything. And something yelled my son's name. And my husband heard it plain, you know, it was really loud. And he thought, you know, it must have been Josh calling for my son Evan. And so then Josh came and he said, who yelled for Evan? And he said, did you need Evan for something?
Mm-hmm.
Thinking Dana, my husband, had called. And he said, well, I thought it was you. And then Evan comes around in his canoe and he's like, what's the matter? What do you want? Who's, you know, and so it was loud and it came from the woods. Apparently, you know, from what they figured, and never could figure out what it was. And you hear that every once in a while Bigfoot, you know, if you're, you know, out around, could possibly say names if they've heard a name
Mimic.
or something. Mimic, yeah. And it happened. It actually
There's
happened.
no doubt about it, right? I mean,
No, it was loud, it was clear, very loud, over the trees and the water and everything, so. And that's just the boundary waters right up on, you know, northern Minnesota.
It's up by Falls.
yeah.
Hmm.
Did somebody else have their hand up?
It's not, it didn't happen here in Minnesota.
That's all right.
It doesn't matter, yeah, just.
Are you okay with being on Facebook?
I guess.
Okay. So what happened?
I was out in Montana staying at a motel, and I opened the back window by the bathroom. I heard gibberish talking, but I couldn't get what they were saying. But it looked like somebody was on a horse, somebody was on a motorcycle. I grabbed my rifle, the scope, and I looked in the trees, and I happened to catch a glimpse of some brown fur or hair, the back or something.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty high off the ground, but it was freaky, because, I mean, there was a piece of wood in that window, keeping it from opening. I'm like, what's this about?
Now you know.
Yeah.
You see.
Do you want to tell your name calling story quick?
Yeah, so it happened twice at the same place. Melissa and I were sitting talking to each other, and a voice said, "Mark." And I thought it was,
You thought it was me.
well, I thought it was you at first.
Yep.
And then I thought it was the other two gals that were sitting there. But it wasn't them. So we caught it on a recorder. But then Russ and I went back in December to walk that area.
Yeah,
As-
several months later.
Yeah, with the snow on the ground, but as we're walking, my name is called through the woods. Like it's loud and clear, like you were saying. Yeah, it's like Ma, a female voice. So who knows who that was? But
Well, in the essence, and one of the reasons we went back the second time is because we had picked up several EVPs of deceased spirits out in the woods. There was an old cabin we ran into out there
Yeah, right close
that was
by.
kind of disintegrated, but bottom line is we ran into some spirits out there and we're like, let's go back out there, and if we feel the energy out there again, we're going to offer them an opportunity to cross over and find a spot other than being lost in the middle of this woods. And in the end, that's what we did. We probably have to go back there one more time
oh darn.
to see if we hear your name being called again. But I'm betting if we go out there again, this time we will not hear your name called. And that was an interesting spot because a couple of us were in not canoes, but in kayaks. And we were kayaking across the lake. And we had teams around in the woods and stuff. And like I say, I usually separate them out quite a bit and try to cover a lot of ground. And I kayaked out there with another member of a team, and we came back. Anyway, after I listened to the audio from that, I had audio recorder running on me. I heard the name of one of the guys that potentially had drowned in the lake. And I heard it as I was oaring the kayak. I'm going to use a fake name, but George Richardson. With every swoop of the noise, of the white noise of me oaring, like about 5 times in a row, George Richardson. I'm like, George Richardson. And I'm like, and that's a big thing that we talk about with a lot of people lately, especially people that are in investigating and stuff. You know, a lot of times we're looking different places and listening for these EVPs and different things. And those EVPs are camouflaged in all the existing noises that you're hearing.
Like human voices. We'll say something and it'll be masked.
Right over the top.
You'll hear it.
And so if I say one thing and it's like, hey, I didn't say that.
Yeah.
Or it's your voice, right? Mimicking or just overriding what I'm saying. And it's using your voice to recommunicate a different type thing. So you really have to listen. Matter of fact, well, I don't want to give it away, but this is the next invention I'm going to make. It's called the cardboard shoe. And I'm going to make a cardboard shoe so I can wish along on the ground and listen to all the voices that are in the sound of the cardboard scraping on the wood floor. Because I hear so many voices in footsteps, whether you're just walking across the room or walking up, and there's just so much communication in that white noise. And this is just our tip of the day.
Or the bubbling of
Yeah.
fish tank.
Yeah, I now carry around a little minnow bubbling battery operated thing, and I bubble it in water in the next room. And when we do our EVP sessions, we can hear communicating through bubbling water. And that was after several locations where we were doing an investigation at somebody's house with a fish tank. I'm like, gosh, whenever there's a fish tank around, I can really hear voices in it, you know? So that's at least we offer some great tips of the day. Anybody else have some stories they want to?
Did you ever cross over the guy that drowned it?
That guy that drowned it, that's like I say, we went back to that vicinity and facilitated a crossover in that facility. Now, the spirits, they're like in a frequency, and we don't always know exactly how big that frequency can be, miles and miles, or it might be just in a room. I mean, it's hard to tell how big. So I haven't been to that exact same spot because of the fact that you have to kind of get to it with a boat.
He didn't call us, or I mean, he didn't identify himself.
Well, other than the fact he said his name in the
No, I mean
O-ring.
the second time.
The second time, no. And
So, hard to say.
but that was a neat spot because that was the only spot I think we've been at, and this spot was just so, it was a very large, deserted area. There's no way potentially anybody was going to be out in the middle of this forest. And from in the forest, from where we were recording, we kept hearing rock knocks. Almost like Morse code or something.
Right.
And that was the only spot I've ever actually heard the rock knocks. I mean, we've heard wood knocks and different things like that. But yeah.
I have another quick one.
Okay.
This was Browns Valley, Minnesota.
Okay.
And this was about 24 to 26 years ago.
Okay.
So, you know, how long have we been talking about Bigfoot and have a lot of knowledge about Bigfoot on TV, and where, you know, it hasn't, you know, that's a little bit longer than all of the, you know, hype of this. And my daughter's best friend and her boyfriend were driving home. They were in high school.
Okay.
And well, they went down to Browns Valley, and we lived 40 miles to the west of Browns Valley. And so when they saw the Bigfoot, they're home, or maybe 40. And they driving down Highway 10, and a Bigfoot was going along the side of the road and they saw it in the headlights perfect. And, you know, even in those days, I mean, you know, knew a little bit about calling it Bigfoot, but more, you know, just this big gorilla, you know, Bigfoot. I mean, so, and I mentioned how far it was to our house, because when they got to our house and they come running in, it was as if they had seen it in our yard, in our driveway. That's how scared they were.
Oh.
They were shaking, and they were just, you know, they just could not believe what they had seen. And and they had really good eye on it. They had good description of it, everything. So, you know, and that's even been that long ago.
Mm-hmm. And it's, you're right on the money when you talk about it being something that's, for a lot of people, that can be a really traumatic event. As a matter of fact, one of the stories that we had heard was about a lady who saw one up north of Grand Rapids, and she was driving along the road, and it was just walking there.
It stopped her car.
Yeah, literally
Walked
kind of walked in front of her. Not like it went in front, but it walked in a manner that she had to slow down and come to almost a complete stop, and she was frightened. And then eventually it walked off into the woods. But
It was over 10 years she didn't drive that road.
10
again.
years
Yeah.
she didn't drive that road again. I mean, it's traumatizing for a lot of people. You know, sometimes, especially you know, I think a lot of us are sitting in this audience right now because we have this curiosity and this wantingness to learn and experience and find out what really is going on with a lot of this stuff. But if you're not interested in something like that, buckets, that's traumatizing. That's something that'll send shiver down your back for years, a lifetime maybe even.
Russ, that gal, I run into her every so often. She doesn't
Don't
like
say
talking.
her name, please.
No, she doesn't like talking about it.
Yeah, still to this day doesn't
Nope.
like talking about it.
Yeah.
So, any stories on this side of the room? No?
Not a story, but I'm curious. I mean, everybody here knows who Grant Wilson is.
Yep.
Have you? And he doesn't talk about it much, but have you heard him talk about the invisible beings he saw from like his youth up until sometime during his television investigation days at all?
You know, I would love to. I've met him and watched some of his stuff here and there. I'm not a big watcher of paranormal, but now that you've told me that, I'm very interested in communicating about it.
The one Paranomicon they had down in Menominee, he actually talked about it a little. He actually, I think it was his producer or whoever was there, actually made sure everybody turned off all video cameras and everything and walked through the back so that nobody was videoing him talking about it even.
Wow.
But sometime when he was younger, he started seeing smaller humanoid beings. I can't remember if he called them like elves or goblins or whatever. And he said he saw them for years. And that was one of the things that got him interested in the paranormal, got him into the whole getting together with his buddy, doing the taps thing, everything. And he said, you know, he could look out into his backyard and he could see one crossing, and he'd ask his family members, like, do you see anything out back there? They could see something stirring the leaves crossing the yard, but only he saw it. And he said he saw it for years until they went and did some filming in Europe, where he saw them there, but he said it was almost like the society of them over there was older, more mature. Like, you know, we are a frontier countries, technically. And it was like over there, they kind of took notice that he was noticing them and were like, you shouldn't be doing that. And it stopped. He couldn't see them anymore.
So, yeah, and, you know, we work with a lot of different teams out there. We worked with squatchers and different teams that are into cryptid and different things like that. And it's in this field of people that we work with here that have sensitivities, it's not unusual for people to...
No, not
Not radiation.
seismic though. She's talking reading tremors in the earth. We don't have anything.
Oh, tremors? Or are you talking more radiation?
Well, radiation too.
Yeah, it's very similar. Yeah, we do have a radiation meter, and I actually went out to that tree. The interesting part about it is that I went to that area, and right at the entrance to this trail, it was high. I'm like, okay, this is something. This trail is gonna be hot. But it was only at the entrance. I walked in, and then it leveled a little bit, and then I got to the tree and around that area where the activity was, and it did the opposite of what I expected. It went down a little bit. And while I was by those trees, it stayed down. And I came around, and I had that meter in one hand, and I had I think it was a millimeter or something in the other hand. I had another meter in my other hand, and all of a sudden the other meter started going off. And at the exact time that other meter went off and was beeping, whether it was EMF or what it was, all of a sudden this massive amount of like mosquitoes, they were like gnats or something. I'm like, wow. And I was like, is it possible that you could measure the onslaught of like gnats and mosquitoes coming at you? It was weird because, you know, radiation wise, it was really calm and less than around those trees, which was, I thought for sure I was going to be picking, because I watched so many shows, especially animal mutilations and stuff. You know, things hot. But I'm going to wrap up this entire thing by just finalizing, using that information on that. I went back to my shack that's in the woods. And I sat down, and you know, we're researchers. I still had that meter. For some reason, I left the radiation meter on, sitting on the table next to me. And I was jotting down notes on my experiences that day, journaling some of the stuff I experienced. I journal everything I experienced. And as I was sitting there, all of a sudden I hear creaking in the walls of the, kind of towards the ceiling of the cabin. And naturally, I looked to my meters right away. And the radiation meter was climbing, like several points, up, 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 up. And then it went away. All of a sudden, knock, 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 a couple more knocks. And I look over, and the radiation meter's climbing again. I'm like, what is making the radiation climb? Now, in my mind, I tried to put science. It's the one time I used science. I said, if the sun shoots one of those radiation, what do they call them? Solar flares out constantly. If a solar flare pushes out in our direction, is it enough to make this building creak in the walls, and it causes the radiation meter to climb? That's like my very simple science. But there was something to it. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know the answers to any of this, but I want to thank you for all coming. I appreciate you.
All right, we have a 15-minute break.